Hi guys, this is another podcast episode with Horsemanship from Ginny. I'm Yaz, and in today's episode I'm going to be talking about why I called my business Horsemanship from Ginny when my name is Yaz and I could incorporate my name into the business. I chose not to. So I often get inquiries from people and they call me Ginny. I very rarely correct them over message because it takes a whole explanation and it's a lot easier just to explain in person. But yeah, my name's Yaz, it's not Ginny. Ginny is the name of the horse I owned from about 13 years old to about 22 years old before I gave her to a couple of my friends. When I was 12, when she was still being broken in, spent my weekends and half terms, my mum driving me up to North Lincolnshire to go and see her so I can spend time with her, get to know her, help train her and things like that. And she came home to me on the 13th of October in 2011. So I spent the better part of the first year falling off Ginny at least 3 times a day. I talked a lot about this in my My Journey podcast, but this is more specific about Ginny herself and why she's so important to me and why I named my business after her. And then once I'd figured out a lot of the behavioural issues I had with her, all the things she taught me, I spent the better part of the next, I spent the next 3 years or so, pretending I was a cowboy, getting cheap Western saddles that clearly didn't fit her, and running around farmers' fields chasing cows and trying to herd them up until I would get chased out by some very angry farmers. Ginny taught me how to do dressage, show jumping, we did cross country. I taught her how to drive, so she taught me how to drive. I'd always wanted to drive but never really had the opportunity. I'd sat passenger a few times in the driving when someone's been driving, but that's about it. I even had to play at some barrel racing, my version of it, which was a few jump wings and going around the corners as fast as I could and getting in trouble for trashing the surface of the school of wherever I was at when I was doing it. I can't remember where I was at when I was doing that. But the owners were not very impressed with me because I didn't realise they have deep sand surfaces for a reason when it comes to Western riding, and that's so you can turn really tight corners and horses can dig holes in the school without doing damage to themselves or to the surface of the school, which English riding isn't really designed for. You don't want that deep sand school that you want in Western riding. So she was very much a jack of all trades. She'd do anything I asked of her. She tolerated a lot of poor training, mishandling from me, frustrations from me, out of control emotions. We had a lot of very good times, far more good times than we had bad times. But there's things like, just a little example of the sort of shit this mare put up with from me was one time when I was looking into Western riding and how cowboys tie their horse, because when I was having real trouble with, when I went out hacking, I'd like to go out for hours on end and disappear into the countryside. My parents, no one would have a fucking clue where I was. And I'd often leave my phone behind so no one could ring me while I was out, which is really smart of a teenager to do, but that's what I liked to do. And I was having trouble, like when I'd untack Ginny and set up for a few hours just to chill out and she could graze, that I'd have to take a lunge line with me, and I'd often find that I'd tie her to trees, but she'd end up getting a leg over it, so it wasn't very relaxing. I was always having to keep an eye on her and be ready to go over to her quickly to get her leg untangled because she was putting her leg over and then turning around and panicking that her leg was over the rope. So I looked into hobbling. So that went down like a fucking lead balloon. So at the time, it was quite hard to get things over from America without a huge tax duty. And so I looked at hobbling. I watched a YouTube video a couple of times on it. I had a quick look on Amazon about buying a few hobbles, and they were going to be like $75 plus $60-something to ship them over. And at 14 years old, I didn't have that kind of money to be spending on stuff like that, and there was not a chance I was going to be able to afford. My mum was going to pay for something like hobbles for a horse for Ginny, and so what I decided to do is my dad had just given me a pair of trackies, which had this quite a thick lace, like a shoelace, running round the base, like round the ankles of them, so you could pull them tight and tie them up. I don't know. I took the shoelace out. It's about double the thickness of a normal pair of shoe trainers that you would get. And so very sensibly, I took those shoelaces out. I took them down to the yard with me. My mum dropped me off. She went off to work. It was half term or something like that. Absolutely no one else was down the yard. And so I tied my horse's legs together with shoelaces. Which is funny to look back on, but absolutely horrific that I actually did that to a horse. Holy fucking hell. So I tied her legs together with shoelaces, because these shoelaces were thicker, so I thought there'd be less chance of them cutting her, blah-de-blah-de-blah. And so on this video for hobbling, what it said to do was you put your hobbles on your horse, you ask them to walk forward, and before they walk forward, you stop them. So as they take that step, and you stop them as they reach the point in their step where they start to feel the effect of the hobble. So they get to understand that the hobble is going to restrict their movement. I watched this YouTube video about 3 times a few nights before I found the shoelaces. So I watched the YouTube video, found the shoelaces that I was going to use as a hobble, and didn't watch the YouTube video again. So when I came to ask Ginny to do it, I tied these laces onto her legs. And when I say tied them, I used a normal knot, double knotted them. And then I went, walk on, Ginny. And she walked on. She staggered and nearly fell on her face, at which point she reared up, flung her legs out in front of her so she'd get her foot in again. She clipped me in the chin. So she got me right on the bottom of my chin. Luckily didn't do any damage. She just clipped me. She barely even hurt me. It was a bit of just a shock, really. And what I then didn't consider was if it all went wrong, or even if it went right, horses are fucking strong. And then I couldn't get the knots undone on this makeshift hobble made of shoelaces that I had. So I was a bit stuck because I didn't want to leave her there in case she tried to walk off and would fall over again. I was really worried that I needed to make sure she stood still. But at the same time, I hadn't thought to bring any scissors out with me in case I needed to cut them off. So I was really quite stuck in the middle of the field. And then luckily one of my friend's dads had come up to sort the horses out for them, bloke called Boise, and I shouted over to him if he could bring me some scissors, and he asked me why, and I was really reluctant to tell him why, because as soon as it came a point of actually saying out loud what I was doing to the horse and what I'd done, I realised how fucking stupid it was. So I had to shout back that I tied her legs together. He was not happy with it. He was not impressed. He brought me the scissors over. He called me he would said it was a fucking stupid thing to do. Why the fuck would I tie my horse's legs together? And bless his Mrs. Joe, she rang my mum up later, apologising for the way he'd spoke to me. My mum was fully on his side that I was a fucking idiot and I shouldn't be tying my fucking horse's legs together, which they were not wrong. Poor fucking Ginny. So that I never ever tried hobbling again because that kind of traumatised me, and yeah, it's probably something I'll never try. Maybe if I meet someone who truly knows how to hobble, it's not something I'll experiment with again. So I also taught Ginny to rear, and I have a bit of a backwards reason why I taught her to rear. So most people teach horses to rear as a trick, something to be able to do for a TV show or an advert, or it's a behaviour you teach just as a trick that you can ask for on command. It's not the reason I taught Ginny to rear. So the reason I taught Ginny to rear was at the time, when I hacked Ginny out, I wanted to be able to turn right out of the yard, because if I turned right out of the yard, I could ride Ginny home. And it wouldn't have taken me, it was only a couple of miles away from home, my house was. So it wouldn't have taken too long. If I went left, I could still ride home, but that would mean jumping a 5-bar gate or going down the A15. And I'd rather just turn right. So when Ginny was napping, she would rear up. She would not turn right out of the yard. She turned left out of the yard. She had no issues with that. But I could not get her to turn right out of the yard. And she'd just start rearing up, backing up into hedges. She was a fucking nightmare. So I decided that the absolute best way to deal with this was, if I taught Ginny to rear, I would no longer be intimidated by her rearing. And so, in my logic, if I was no longer intimidated by her rearing and I could ride a rear and I was no longer scared, I'd be able to sort the problem out myself. And weirdly, it sort of worked. So, alongside that, one of the girls at the yard, the owner's daughter of the yard, she helped me because she followed me one day screaming at Ginny. It's not how I'd do it now, but at the time, I didn't know any better. And that was just the way things were done. She spent the entire hack following Ginny in her car, getting out and screaming at her every time she napped to get her to move forward. And, so she helped with that. Again, like I said, not how I deal with a napping horse now, but that was how I dealt with it back then. Well, I didn't really deal with it. I got help to deal with it. But yes, so that was largely how we fixed the napping. But like I said, weirdly, the teaching her to rear thing did help quite a bit, because it sort of took the power of it out for Ginny. So she was a very strong-willed animal, and there were lots of things she did and didn't want to do, and she had her say. And rearing up was usually her go-to when it came to not wanting to go somewhere, and boy did that and she still does quite like to rear. That's her go-to. But when it came to the ridden work, the rearing didn't scare me anymore. On the ground, it didn't scare me anymore because I got a rearing on the ground. So it took a lot of the power out of the rear for her, and pretty much with removing that power of her rearing, a lot of her behaviours went away. A lot of her napping behaviours, refusal behaviours. The only one that didn't was train lines and loading. I never quite fixed her loading issues because, like I've said before in the past, I learnt with her, so she learnt with me, and she found every trick. She got a lot of trauma around the trailer as well, through lots of people getting frustrated with her. She was a fucking nightmare. But I can now get her on and calm her down. It's just, it takes 20 minutes or so to get her through the idea that I'm not going to do what we used to do to her. I'm sure if I did a loading course with her now, I could fix it, but there's no real need for it now. So yeah, the rearing thing works. My plan, as flawed as it was, of a 13-year-old child, it surprisingly worked. So, yeah. Now, Ginny also went blind in one eye. So I'm not 100% sure what happened to Ginny's eye, but while I was doing my apprenticeship, I had her on livery there, and Ginny was always very difficult to worm. And so worming day was coming along, and I asked the yard manager not to worm Ginny and to wait until I got there so I could worm her, because she could get quite upset and she could be quite... she had the potential to get quite upset when worming her, but I knew how to worm her in a way that didn't upset her and it was largely not hiding the wormer behind your back. It was putting the wormer on her face, stroking her face with it a little bit, sticking your finger in her lip a couple of times, getting her relaxed, kind of tricking her a bit into being like, everything's going to be fine, I'm not going to put it in your mouth, it'll all be alright, and then suddenly, whip, worm's in your mouth, too late, job's done. Oh, I dropped my phone. But that was how I wormed her, and it worked fine. You could worm her with no issues, as long as you didn't try and bully her into it. Now again, like I said, I don't know exactly what happened, but I know by the time I got down there, Ginny had been wormed, and I wasn't right happy about it, and she'd also been turned out again by the time I got to her, so I didn't know what had happened. And now when I was at this yard, I was always very tired. I was working sometimes 50-hour weeks. It was insane, the hours I was working. I was always very tired. I never had any time for Ginny. There was a lot of land there. She was in the herd. And oftentimes with Ginny, it was you'd sort of see her at a distance. She was running around. She wasn't lame. She'd come over, but usually I was catching other horses. She wasn't too fussed. She's quite happy to be left alone. She'd made friends with a couple of other horses. So I didn't get a lot of hands-on interaction with her every single day. I just didn't have the time for it. And this went on for quite a while, quite a few months, where I'd just quickly look at her, check she was alright, check her, and just left her really in the field to do her own thing, because she seemed fine. And she'd always been a very hardy horse that you could pick up and put down whenever you needed to. You could just turn her out for a bit of time, and she had a great time. She never really came back in with any foot problems. Never really had thrush if you didn't pick her feet out every day. There was no she was fine. She was always just fine. And then I went back to her a couple of months, went to bring her in, because I wanted to start bringing her back into work. And her eye had gone all funky. It was really clouded over. It was looking smaller. Don't get me wrong, I should have seen this long before that, but I was 17 at the time, working 50, sometimes 60-hour weeks. I was exhausted, and I just didn't have time for Ginny. And she had ad-lib haylage. She was fat she was fine, as far as I thought anyway. So once I found out about her eye, I got the vet out, and the vet basically told me the eye was damaged, the eye was dying, but it didn't look like it was causing her any pain. We could get the eye removed, but that was going to cost a lot of money. Chances are she'd be fine if we just left it in there, so that's what I did. And I never really looked beyond that. I never really asked again. Never got the eye really looked at again, and I should have done. So then, when I put her out on loan, my friends decided I think she damaged it again, or she whacked it again, or something happened. So she went to the vets and had it removed, and it was really quite obvious after she'd had it removed that it probably was causing her a bit of pain. She looked a lot more comfortable when she'd had it out. And I should have done better than that, really. I just didn't have the money, I didn't have the time, and I just went off with what the vet had initially told me in that first look into her eye, and ran with that, really. So yeah, she lost her eye, and she's far better off for it. Really. And so why did I give her away? So when I put her out on loan, I was convinced I was done with horses. I was never going to work with horses again. And my friends had her on loan, between 3 of them. They were all sharing her. And to be honest, they were just asking me silly things about her and about things that they could do with her, when I was very much, the only stipulation I had was, do not pull her mane, don't cut her mane. I want her mane to stay long. Other than that, do what you like with her, really. I just want to know where she is, and I want her mane long, really. So they're asking me a lot of questions that I didn't really feel like they needed to have to ask to loan a horse. So I was done with horses. They were looking after her really well. I didn't see myself going back to horses ever again. And even if I did, I probably wouldn't take Ginny back, because she was being treated far better than I could ever do or afford to do. So I thought what was best for her. So I asked them if they just wanted her. If they wanted her to be theirs, they can take all the decisions. If they want to cut a mane, they can cut a mane. If they want to pull a mane, they can pull a mane. It's up to them. Yeah, that was my decisions on that. Was then they didn't have to feel so nervous when I came to see her, because there was a couple of times where they were like, oh, so-and-so's cut her fetlocks, her feathers on her fetlocks, and I was like, I'm not fussed, don't stress about it, or they've cut her tail and just trimmed her, she needs her tail trimming, it's part of the care of horses, I'm not fussed, like, things like that. They were just new to horses, they weren't annoying me or anything like that, it just made me giggle a bit, and I thought, do you know what, you have her, she's yours, you do everything you need to do, you take responsibility for her, she's your horse. And they were happy to take her. So she spent a couple of years with them, working, with one of them riding, one of them long reining, or two of them riding, one of them long reining. It's slowly dropped down to two of them, and I think only one of them has her now. But after that she came up lame, and she turns out she has arthritis in her far fore, because she dishes in that leg. And they'd had her a few years by this point, so by no means had I missed the lameness in her. She'd always been sound. I think she'd only ever been lame once, and that was from a kick, from what we could gather. She'd always been sound. We'd never had any lameness issues with her, and she now has this arthritis, which is really quite common, specifically in Arabs, because Ginny was an Arab cross. And the arthritis would never, obviously arthritis doesn't really ever get better, but this was quite a degenerative arthritis. According to all Google things, is once the horse has been diagnosed with it, they've got about 3 to 5 years to live. It's been a few years since she was diagnosed with that, and she's just turned out in a field and retired now. She still gets doted on every day. Sarah goes down to see her every day. Pooh picks her, gives her cuddles, puts her rug on and off, does whatever she needs, really. They're buying a new field shelter for her. She's an absolute princess and treat like one, just like she deserves to, bless her. I am really happy for her. I'm a bit gutted that I gave her away and that she's not with me now, but even now, although I've got a field for her that she could come live in, she'd never get the level of care with me that she gets with Sarah, because I just don't have the money for it, really. Not that she needs much care now anyway, but it's just, she's happy where she is. They've done a fantastic job with her. They love her to bits, and so that's absolutely fine. I'd love to have her back any day, but she is their horse, and that's their decision. And if they want to keep her, I'm absolutely happy for them to keep her, because she couldn't be in a better place, to be honest. And so that leads me up to why I named my business after her. So she taught me everything. Pretty much everything in my life I can trace back to that horse. So the partner I've got now, I met him through the person I bought Ginny off. All the work I've got through have been through opportunities that she's given me. She's meant so much to me, and I've always felt a bit guilty that she's never really benefited from what she taught me, because when I was working with horses, with some of the more high-end horses, she was still my horse, and I started to want more of her, and I wanted her to do dressage and a bit more show jumping and stuff like that. She was getting older, and we started to clash quite a lot, where she just wanted the teenager that wanted to play, or she was happy to entertain a teenager that wanted to play, but she weren't interested in wanting to do all this serious schooling stuff. And she'd still try it for me and do bits and bobs for me, but it wasn't really her thing. And I was still at a point where I was getting frustrated a lot with her, mostly because I didn't have the time for her that I wanted. So she'd go 2 weeks without being ridden, and then I'd ride her and it wouldn't go well because she hasn't been ridden for 2 weeks. Or she was also prone to tying up, and she tied up very easily just at the idea of doing some, so I had to stop jumping her. I couldn't take her for a gallop down the field. And yeah, I was working a lot, so I didn't have a lot of time for her. So then when I couldn't do the things I wanted, it was really frustrating. And owning my own horse became miserable. And yeah, I just didn't have the capacity to deal with her as well as working with horses. And at the same time, I was at university in Cambridge, so I was travelling between Cambridge and Peterborough on the train all the time, and then travelling up and working with the horses. So it just made, I was exhausted all the time. And like I said in my previous podcast on my journey, I was on a burnout anyway. So Ginny never really got to benefit from all the things I learnt from her, because a lot of the things I learnt from her, I learnt post having her, through the dogs, through the parrots, the stuff I learnt with the parrots, and coming back into horses and working with some more difficult horses. It's things she taught me, but I wasn't ready to learn. And I think back and I'm like, oh yeah, she taught me that stuff. And it's really sunk in now in a way that I wasn't able to understand back then. So, yeah, I feel like I owe that mare a lot. I owe her a hell of a lot. Far more than she owes me nothing. She's never owed me anything. And I'm really happy for her where she is. But so then when it came to redoing my branding and redoing my logo and the name of the business, because I was called Yasmin's Horsemanship, which was all stuff that I just came up with as an 18-year-old to try and make a business name, and everything all sort of sounded and looked a bit childish. So when I was talking with Beth, who owns Fernley, I talked about him in the last podcast, about doing a logo, she wanted to use my surname, which I wasn't keen on. Morgan K, it's a bit of a mouthful. Didn't particularly just want to use the K name. I didn't particularly just want to use the Morgan name because I've got a double-barreled surname. And I really wanted to keep the silhouette. So that silhouette in my logo is Ginny and me doing Chase Me Charlie while I was in my school uniform and some wellies. So all it was I went on Paint, got this picture off Facebook, and I drew round it in black and then filled it all in and made a silhouette. Beth has tidied it all up, because she said if you looked in on it, you could see where there were bits where I'd missed or whatever, and then I just cut it out by hand again with some scissors on Paint. Like I said, I was 18. This is nearly 10 years ago now that I did this. So, and I didn't have Photoshop or anything like that, and I sure as hell didn't know how to use it. So, like I said, just Paint. And I told Beth what it meant to me and why I really wanted to keep the silhouette and the story behind it a bit, and that's where she came up with the idea of naming it about somewhere around Ginny, and she sent me a few different logo ideas, and ultimately I landed on the one that I picked. So yeah, thanks to Beth, that all came out the way it did. I hope that explains a little bit more about why I've named the business the way I have, why it's called Ginny and I'm not called Ginny. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed that, guys. I will see you on the next one.